Welcome, everybody, to 20th Century Women in Landscape Design. This is week 5 of our series of talks on 6 remarkable women. And these talks are organised and brought to you as a collaborative venture between Fowler and the Gardens Trust. We've looked at some of the less well-known crown jewels of the young profession in this series. Susan Jellicoe, Brenda Colvin, who was one of the founder members, Sheila Haywood, who joined the organisation shortly afterwards, and Mary Mitchell, who in Joy Burgess's fascinating talk last week showed that she was of the next generation of landscape architects, building on the work of these pioneers, and how some became her friends and colleagues. Mary Mitchell has remained an elusive figure for a long time now, although she was one of the few to be recorded by the Oxford Dictionary National Biography. And so it's been a revelation to discover more about the range of work she was involved with and different places and countries where she practiced. Her work on new towns and with Birmingham City Council and others, and with sculptors as well. I thought it was a shame that the flamingo sculpture at Grimsby was not appreciated by their local population. Before I introduce our next speaker, the information about Marion Thompson is on the Fowler website. It's on the end of April the 30th. And if it's not yet on the Garden Trust website, it will be in the next day or two. Please add a big blob in your diaries for the 30th of April, for the last in this series. And the photos we've received of her and her planting and drawings and paintings and things look so interesting. So it is a great pleasure now to introduce Wendy Titman to speak about Lady Allen of Hurtwood, the first name on the Institute of Landscape Architects member list, and like Brenda Colvin, a founder member of the Institute. It's very special for us also, is that Marjory Allen was somebody who Wendy got to know at the beginning of her career, and again now through her research for this talk. So through her design and development consultancy, Wendy Titman has been involved in the creation of environments for children and young people in schools, nurseries and children's centres in the UK. Her research into the semiotics of children's environments, published as Special Places, Special People, The Hidden Curriculum of School Grounds, published in 1992, led to a period of international work. Prior to this, Wendy was involved with provision for children outside school, including the development of adventure playgrounds, during which time she had the pleasure of knowing Marjory Allen. So with great pleasure, Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Annabelle. So, as you've heard, Marjory was an early member of the ILA, hence the title ILA to DIY, because probably what she is best known for is the work that she did on behalf of children, and especially her belief that children needed to be allowed to make their own environments, hence the DIY. She was an incredible woman who, as Annabella said, I had the pleasure to meet, and her life tells a remarkable story, which I hope to do justice to this evening, using her own words, mostly taken from her memoirs, which will appear on slides in italics. Generally, I'm presenting a chronology, but as Marjory pursued some tangential interests, there are times when I have consolidated aspects, for example, with her publications, as we'll see later. I've also included some references at the end for those of you who might like to explore her further. This first quote explains much about her motivation. One moment of illumination, I suddenly thought that I was unique in the whole world. There had never been and would never be anyone just like me. The extension of this thought, that every me is unique, has guided me through life whenever I was working for children or planning opportunities for them. Every child is an individual marvel, gifted with unique capacities, ready to respond to those who trust them and to those who have no fear of giving them freedom. Marjory Gill was born in Bexley Heath in 1897, the same year as Brenda Colvin. Her mother, Sarah Shorey, went to a newly opened progressive school in London called the Aske's Haberdashers, where she enjoyed an excellent education, becoming one of the first women admitted through examination to the civil service. There are clues here to Marjory's development, as Sarah became involved in the Rights for Women movement, and while she waited 25 years for the vote, noted that to be free, a woman must first be physically free, and she cheerfully discarded her corsets, or stays as they were known, saying that she sacrificed the so much admired wasp waist, but breathed thereafter with savage freedom. Indeed, the call to freedom is a continuous thread through Marjory's life and work as well. Sarah married George Gill, who Marjory says was a reformer all his life, always fighting with reason and persuasion for one cause or another. She said, "I am glad I was born into this tradition." She certainly followed in her father's footsteps, and her mother's too. Marjory says of formal education, in different ways, but many times, that she was not much interested in it. A clue perhaps to the reason she called her autobiography Memoirs of an Uneducated Lady. Of her early education, she notes, "It was obvious that the school did not suit me." Then one Friday, whilst out on a trip with friends, they came across Bedale's school, which she joined the following Monday. Bedale's was started by John Hayden Badley in 1893. He married Amy Garrett, cousin of Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who founded the famous Hospital for Women, and Millicent Fawcett, the political activist and writer who led Britain's largest women's rights organisation. Bedale's became coeducational in 1898, said to have been called at the time a preposterous experiment. Education there was based on head, hand and heart, as promoted by Ruskin and others. Bedale's became famous for its emphasis on outdoor work, and pupils were involved in all aspects of use, maintenance and care of the whole site, including a 100-acre farm. Badley said outdoor work is healthy work, real work, necessary work, and unselfish work. Also that only head work is apt to make people dull, irritable, and sometimes conceited as well. Marjory was 13 when she joined Bedale's, and the archive contains various mentions of her, which I include because they seem again to provide clues to her future. The motto shown on the slide, "Work of each for weal of all," uses weal as it stems from Weller, Old English, for well-being or happiness. Another key, perhaps. The archive also says that she was secretary of the Social Work Society, member of the school parliament. She undertook a survey of the geological conditions of the surrounding area, and she rescued the Steephurst Garden, which was, in her words, in a very bad state, no offence to previous gardeners. The rose beds were badly in need of weeding and manuring and pruning, and the other beds were just tangles of weeds. Previously, voluntary subscription had been collected, but it seemed more satisfactory to have a definite allowance, so the chief, John Hayden Badley, agreed to 5 shillings a term. And then, as she was leaving, he met Marjory and asked her if she would become head of school, because he said she would give the prefects the right sort of lead. So she showed early talent as a good organiser. The talks she arranged included women's work in the settlements, the call to suffrage, and the International Women's Congress, amongst others. And there's interest in democracy, as the archive includes a report about one of the great debates, This house believes that turnips should be grown upside down, which apparently was carried 24 to 14. And of course, there's mention of gardening. But it's perhaps the chief's recognition that she provides the right sort of lead, which foretells something she seemed to do a lot. After leaving Bedales, Marjory took a job as a pot boy with Edwin Beckett, head gardener at Aldenham House, home of Vicary Gibb. At the time, the arboretum is said to have contained 179 different varieties of oak and 500 of thorn. A year later, Marjory went to Reading to study for a diploma in horticulture, where, having no formal qualifications, she had to get permission for them to be waived. However, she couldn't or wouldn't state her religion, and this caused a furore such that her father threatened to write to Lloyd George, then the Prime Minister. Reading conceded, and she was awarded her diploma in 1920. The following year, she created a new garden at Bedales for the junior school called Dunhurst, when this photo, we think, was probably taken. As a result of this project, she got her first professional commission, working on a new house near the school. Having completed that, she went to Rome to study gardens. There she met Clifford Allen. They were married in 1921. Then she took to advertising her services, as you can see, under Wanted. Marjory gave birth to a daughter, Polly, in 1922. In 1923, she started writing about gardening for the Manchester Guardian and continued with private garden commissions. By 1926, she was a Fellow of the Royal Horticultural Society, and by 1927, she'd designed gardens at Glyndebourne, several town gardens, a roof garden, probably her first, for Nonsuch Press in Soho, a country garden for Sir Oswald Mosley and Lady Mosley, and another for H.G. Wells. In 1928, she and Clifford acquired an acre of land on Hurtwood Common above Ewhurst in Surrey, where they built Hurtwood House, shown on the slide on the left. Having commissioned an architect, Marjory notes that they were appalled at the, quotes, unimaginative Georgian-type house, obviously unsuited to the wild, romantic place of its setting. In the end, she drew her dream home on the back of a cigarette cup, and notes that the architect didn't like her design any more than she liked his. So once he'd planned the drainage, he withdrew, or more likely was sent packing. Her design included space for a housekeeper and visitors, and had a common room at the top, which led to a roof terrace, of course, commanding panoramic views of the Wealden Downs. Together with neighbours, they formed a parents' cooperative and opened what they called a nursery school due to its principles, but children could actually stay until they were 13. The photo is of Clifford and Marjory at the school with, it's thought, Polly somewhere in the windows. Marjory says, this was my first experience in nursery schools, and all I learnt of their immense value has since been amply confirmed. These photos were kindly supplied to me by owners of Hurtwood House after the Allens left. The black and white photo is thought to be late 50s, and the colour one later, but probably retaining some Marjory elements, especially perhaps those pots. She used these a lot, it seems, even noting the style on a plan that we show later. This image, which Sally used in the first talk in this series, shows Marjory with Susan and Geoffrey Jellicoe and other fellows. My justification for using it here is to provide a hanger for some of Marjory's work with or on behalf of the ILA. As I've said, Marjory is actually listed as the first fellow, and she remained involved with the ILA all her life, making some significant contributions to policy. In 1942, she records being invited to address the Institute, saying, Instead of dealing with immediate problems, I looked to the future and the opportunities there would be for increasing the beauty and usefulness of the land. Her address was reported in Landscape and Gardens, where she said, "Landscape architecture is not merely a profession, still less a luxury trade. It's a new national service affecting the character of our people and even our political democracy. It's the purpose of this meeting to enlist your support in our endeavour to found as speedily as may be adequate facilities for the proper training of these future landscape architects by creating not less than 4 schools of landscape architecture, preferably associated with schools of architecture, civil engineering and town planning." In a BBC recording some years later, she said, "In those days, there was no training. You learnt to be a gardener and grafted on architecture, or trained as an architect and grafted on horticulture." As a result of what Marjory called a brainwave while shopping in Oxford Street, she visited Selfridges and went up to the top floor, emerging onto a vast grey expanse stretching from one end of the store to the other. She said, "The sun was brilliant, the air fresh, and I thought with regret of all those salesgirls, secretaries and office workers who were presumably eating their sandwiches in the dark recesses of the underworld. Why not make a garden where they could find some peaceful relaxation?" She didn't know Gordon Selfridge, but as he wore a carnation in his buttonhole, she deduced he liked flowers. She discovered he'd already considered doing something similar, but felt the cost prohibitive. So Marjory got the contractors to agree to work at no cost for free advertising. She made an appointment with Gordon Selfridge and he agreed. She signed the contract on a window with his diamond. Marjory says that while she knew something about roof gardens, she had never worked on such a scale, so she asked Richard Sudell to join her. She also notes that while some of the gardens have been failures, these are generally made by architects who don't know about plants or country gardeners who don't understand asphalt. What became known as the Hanging Gardens of London opened in the spring of 1930. This image shows the garden sometime later, but it is undated. The space was about 500 feet long and 100 feet wide. They took 1,000 tons of material up in the lift. On one occasion, the lift got stuck when it was full of rich-smelling farmyard manure in open-ended sacks. It was stuck above the perfume counter. They were allowed no more than 18 inches of soil over the asphalt, yet apparently the hollyhocks grew to 6 feet tall. In 6 months, they created a series of gardens, an old-fashioned English garden with stocks, pinks, snapdragons, wallflowers, lupins, lavender and roses. A rose garden and a lily pool where grills in the wall provided a view of Hampstead Hills. A garden of scents led to the sheltered winter garden, and the large water garden was bounded by 2 long herbaceous borders. The gardens used 60,000 plants a year that were grown at Selfridges Sports Ground. From the horticultural point of view, Marjory claimed it excelled all expectations, allowing greater control than in a normal garden and new conclusions to be drawn as to how particular plants fared in rooftop conditions. 35,000 people a week visited the gardens. The summer of 1930 was apparently roasting, yet as a result of clever design to conserve water, the lawns were, quote, velvety and brilliant, and a commissionaire was employed to stop people tugging at the grass to see if it was real. Marjory and Richard Sudell looked after the gardens for 3 years. Then the store management decided to use them to display the garden equipment, including gnomes, toadstools, and what Marjory refers to as other god-wattery. When she said they would have to choose between the gnomes and she and Richard, they chose the gnomes. So she notes with some sadness that the magic of the gardens melted away, and within a few months all had vanished. I couldn't find a picture of gnomes, but wouldn't be surprised to learn that a pool with diving boards and plastic swans might have been part of the problem. Clifford Allen was never a healthy man since his incarceration as a conscientious objector during World War I. In 1933, as a result of further deterioration in his health, he gave up all hope of becoming an MP and was created Baron Allen of Hurtwood. Later that year, Marjory accepted a commission to create a roof garden as part of a pioneering housing development near St Pancras Station in London. The architect was Ian Hamilton. As may be seen from the plan, the only one drawn by Marjory that we've been able to find, it is signed Lady Marjory Allen of Hurtwood. A full report of the project appeared in Volume 1, Number 1 of Landscape and Gardens. In it, she said, "The nursery is housed in a series of light and sunny rooms at the top of the block. 2 large French windows opened out onto the garden, the flowers and fountains of which could be seen from the main rooms. In planning the garden, it was essential that sufficient space should be left free for the children's small resting beds to be brought out in bright weather and for meals to be taken in the sun." She also remarks that by being involved at conception, it was possible to have the chimney stacks planned in such a way that they did not interfere with the valuable roof space. There are green rubber tiles on the floor, which says are easily cleaned and provide a happier surface for small feet than concrete or asphalt. Quite revolutionary back then. She dealt with the problem of wind by erecting glass windscreens. The panels had bronze supports made, apparently from a derelict submarine, and she got this funded by a kind benefactor, something she seemed to also be very good at. Marjory returned often to the benefits of using roof space. She said there seems to be no fundamental reason why roof gardens should not be considered as essential as bathrooms. Air, sun and light are as necessary for the spiritual well-being as is water for the body. Of St Pancras, she says, the children worked and played in the open air without disturbing anyone. Their chatter floated into space, and not, as it does from street level, to the harassed tenants in flats above. She remarks how the children changed colour, being naked. I guess that's no surprise. And mothers threw off their exhausted looks and became happier companions to their children. From her comments, it's apparent that she retained contact with this nursery for some time in order to draw these observations. In studying her life, it's rare to come across negativity, but she remarks rather pointedly that this nursery garden still exists, unlike my other gardens. Indeed, a second was built on the same estate. In the spring of 1936, Marjory notes what she called a new and formidable task. She was asked to chair the Coronation Planting Committee, possibly the first of many such roles. Having vigorously put forward the view that the event should be about creating places of lasting beauty rather than transient schemes, she was voted into the chair. Apparently, Clifford told her that anyone who speaks up well at meetings often gets given a job, and she says ruefully she didn't listen. It was a huge undertaking that, of course, had to be renamed and reorganised after the abdication of Edward VIII. In order to encourage the making of places of lasting beauty, detailed guidance was produced, including designs for parks, play parks, allotments, and even cemeteries. A record was created of every project, over 15,000 in all, and of every tree planted in the UK and across the empire. This record ran to 650 pages, and only 3 copies were printed. One was presented to the king, one for the person who created it, and the third was given to Marjory. The Garden History blog includes a quote about the collection of acorns in Windsor Great Park, describing how countless bushels were packed into sacks and sent to the committee HQ in London so that every child could grow a royal oak. As a result of the reality of war impacted Marjory says, in a way, as a pacifist, she could take no part in, but she said she could help children. She'd become a member of the executive of the Nursery Schools Association when in January 1940, a government circular went out to all local authorities, urging them to set up nursery centres as speedily as possible. By November, only 6 centres had been created, so Marjory wrote to the Times, raising concerns that progress was too slow. Still nothing happened, well, not quickly enough for her. So she approached the British War Relief Society of America, asking for funding for 10 regional organisers. She got the money. Still, the facilities were lacking, so she asked a friend and architect, Judith Ledbetter, also a fellow of the Institute, to create a purpose-designed prefabricated building, which was fireproof, damp, and rot-resistant. She formed a committee which she chaired, went back to the Americans and obtained funding for 2 demonstration centres. The first 2 buildings cost £600 each, and the parts could be assembled in just 3 days. She notes that these were visible proof that mass-produced structures need not be a blot on the landscape, that these were beautiful inside and out, light and airy, with French windows leading to a paved terrace. Within a year of the first demonstration centres, 200 nursery centres were in existence. This was, by any measure, a truly extraordinary achievement, which owed much to Marjory's exceptional vision, determination, and great PR. A model was made for a major exhibition at the RIBA, then used as a travelling exhibition taken around the country. Various high-profile supporters were involved in these initiatives, including Queen Mary, Lady Astor, and other significant politicians. And a remarkable film was made called Double Thread, which was subtitled and sent all around the world. Some of the centres survived into the late 1960s, and the film, which is a wonderful insight into the world of small children 80 years ago, can still be seen today. I've included details at the end. Having created these nursery centres, Marjory says, whilst in a nursing home during one of her many bouts of poor health, that she'd been worrying for some time that the nurseries were desperately short of equipment and play materials. Later, whilst walking through Hyde Park, she saw piles of debris from bomb-damaged houses that had been dumped there, furniture, flooring, scorched timber. And needless to say, she saw an opportunity. However, she needed person power to collect and use it. Apparently, during the Blitz, firefighters experienced periods of downtime between raids. So she approached her old friend, Herbert Morrison, who was then Home Secretary, and got permission to approach the fire service for help. Naturally, he agreed, as did the fire service, and then the War Relief Society of America sent tools. She calls them her old friends. A report about the project includes this comment: from the start, when Lady Allen of Hurtwood rather timidly explained the scheme, it had an immediate appeal, went with a swing. Thousands of toys have been made in hundreds of stations. I can't quite reconcile the idea of timid, but anyway. In order to ensure the equipment was good in terms of style and size and design, she assembled a team of expert craftspeople and artists to produce prototypes to be distributed along with the materials. In the mid-1944, there were 1,559 wartime nurseries in Great Britain, accommodating 71,888 children. The London Fire Service had by then equipped 532 nurseries with 20,264 toys. Other agents joined in, and by the end of the war, 3 million toys and pieces of equipment had been distributed. Marjory said, "It was one of the most exciting and rewarding schemes I ever had a hand in." In 1946, Marjory was invited to lecture in Norway, stopping to refuel in Copenhagen. She was met by the director of Froebel College, who whisked her off to Emdrup, a housing estate with a playground provided by a landscape architect called Professor C.T. Sorensen. Sorensen wrote in Marjory's book, Planning for Play, that he'd first proposed junk playgrounds in 1931 as places where children could have access to real things like old cars, timber, etc. But it was not until 1943 that what was probably the first junk playground was opened. He did it, he says, because he noted from his previous work creating playgrounds that children actually preferred to make their own places. So Emdrup was provided as a place for children to create their own, where they could dig, build, experiment with soil, sand, water, light fires and cook. As can be seen from the drawing, it was sunk below street level with a densely planted bund of soil around the perimeter, which helped to shield it from view, an advantage to those both inside and out. I included it because it conveys the strange reality of adventure playgrounds, as Marjory noted about one of hers, Lollard Street. When we opened it, there was nothing there. In an attempt to spread her enthusiasm, Marjory resorted, as usual, to the press, persuading the editor of Picture Post to include the story of her visit. The excellent photographs were taken by Francis Rees, who was Danish and must have enjoyed a visit to Emdrup to take the photos. This started a slow burn because it was a long while before anywhere else, with more than a very short life, materialized. Somewhat inevitably, Marjory became involved with a wide range of other issues impacting children's lives, both in the UK and farther afield. These don't lend themselves to this visual medium very well, but it would be remiss of me not to mention at least some, as they formed a very substantial part of Marjory's life and work. The campaign to establish nursery schools eventually resulted in a duty on local authorities to make provision for children under 5 years in the 1944 Education Act. However, Marjory notes, ruefully, that 30 years on, only half of all 3- and 4-year-olds were able to access nursery provision, and that was thanks to Margaret Thatcher's government. Her work during the war identified issues around what she called children deprived of a normal home life. She campaigned, published a pamphlet called Whose Children, which recorded some of the abuses she saw when visiting orphanages and other institutions around the UK. A committee was eventually set up, leading to the Children's Act 1948. This introduced wholesale change to legal duties, standards, and control and inspection of places caring for children. Herbert Morrison wrote to her and said, "I was mad with the press for not featuring you as the heroine of this bill, as truly you are, and for missing a dramatic story of how in our democracy the individual can get things done. Then, as a result of contacts made in Norway, a new body was established, the World Council for Early Childhood Education, known as OMEP, thanks to the French translation, which she chaired for some time and still exists today. In 1950, Marjory was headhunted to become the United Nations Social Welfare Liaison Officer to UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. She packed up Hurtwood and took off to Paris, spending the next 18 months travelling the world to further this cause. In order to do it, she resigned the chair or active membership of more than 10 significant organisations, but she did keep some. On her return, Hurtwood was sold, but it was not long before she and Polly moved back to the Hurtwood Hills, having bought a garage to convert. She remarks, "I was now a gardener again." While all this was going on, the seed was sown from the Picture Post article began to germinate. An experimental playground was started in Camberwell, London, and then another in North Kensington, where in 1951 Marjory was asked to join the committee, of course, mainly, she said, so she could pacify the neighbours who seemed to think their very lives were threatened. Mary Nicholson, with whom Marjory wrote her memoirs, was already a member and became a great friend. Being a well-seasoned campaigner, Marjory saw that this concept needed to grow more quickly to survive, and she wrote again to the Times. The response suggested existing initiatives needed help, coordination and support. Lord Luke, then chairman of the National Playing Fields Association, responded by calling an open meeting in February 1953. He also offered to publish a pamphlet if Marjory would write it, which of course she did, using the name Adventure Playground for the very first time. The Oxford English Dictionary definition was originally a creative playground with tools and waste materials, later developed into a place where children are provided with miscellaneous equipment, often waste, from which they contrive their own amusement. This definition was attributed to Marjory, and it's still used throughout the world today, but not necessarily in ways which I fear Marjory would approve. A national coordinating body was set up under the umbrella of the NPFA, and at the first meeting she was asked, "Which of your ladies do you choose to remain?" She says she was too dumbfounded to speak. Needless to say, all the ladies stayed. Of the NPFA, Marjory notes, the only thing they knew about was flat spaces with posts at each end. The picture on the slide is of Lollard Street, with the Houses of Parliament just visible in the background. It was lovingly called, the playground, not the Houses of Parliament, the ruins by the users, and apparently indignantly described as an eyesore by the local adults. However, there was soon a proliferation of adventure playgrounds, not only in London, but all across the country. Adventure playgrounds were undoubtedly untidy and noisy, and usually open 7 days a week until late at night. However, as she and others, myself included, can attest, they were also usually full of kids of all ages. Where do you see 18-year-olds playing today? Children seized on the opportunities that they didn't get legitimately elsewhere to dig, build, demolish, plunder, create, negotiate, light fires, cook, discover, explore, and experiment. Marjory said, "Children want, above all, things they can move about and use for all sorts of purposes. At its best, play is a kind of research, and like all research at the adult level, it should be an adventure and an experiment that are greatly enjoyed." The London Adventure Playground Association was formed in 1962, and by 1974 there were 60 in London alone. Marjory was chair for 10 years. The International Playground Association was formed in 1963. She was vice president. It still exists today. As ever, Marjory wasn't shy when it came to her causes, and she was greatly energized by the inappropriateness of most of the environments created for children, as can be seen from this slide, taken from the introduction to her book, Planning for Play, published in 1968. You will see, top left, the prison period, an administrator's heaven and a child's hell. The ironmongery period, proliferation of prison bars. The concrete pipe period, paucity of invention. The novelty period, the pride of the town clerk. The maze period, the greatest respect is accorded to what is most boring. And finally, the do-it-yourself period. It is the children who shall play. She says, the use made of land around buildings is still almost always totally unsuitable for children. Most of the vast rebuilding schemes in many countries are horrible places planned without love and understanding. This arrogance, this paucity of invention, this disregard for the worth and scale of the individual represents a worldwide disease and is one of the tragedies of affluence. She repeatedly condemns the use of expensive fixed features, unalterable forms, the over-elaborate, over-clever, too slick, the pride of the architects, she says. Recently, the insights of the great Simon Nicholson have become on trend again, though sadly in our soundbite culture, most of the richness of what he professed is often lost. His series of loose parts, first published in Landscape Architecture Quarterly in 1971, says, in any environment, both the degree of inventiveness and creativity and the possibility of discovery are directly proportional to the number and kind of variables in it. What he also went on to say was, what has happened is that adults, in the form of professional artists, architects, landscape architects and planners, have had all the fun playing with their own materials and concepts, and then the builders have had all the fun building the environments out of real materials. Thus has all the fun been stolen, and the educational cultural system makes sure they hold the belief that this is right. We can only assume that Marjory knew well that, directly or otherwise, she was criticising associates, colleagues, or at least people she knew or who knew her. But she did it anyway. Quite what impact this had on some of her personal relationships is not apparent. But time and again she returns to the need for children to be given freedom. Over 50 years ago, she was arguing tirelessly for recognition of the link between opportunities for children to learn to take and calculate risk and their healthy development and well-being. She warned of a national tragedy unless this was heeded and actioned. This, as we can see, was sadly prophetic. It wasn't long before Marjory identified the need for adventure playgrounds for what was then known as handicapped children. Another small committee with a big agenda. The preliminary work took 4 years, but in February 1970, an experimental playground opened in the garden of the rural dean of Chelsea. She said, with a powerful earth shifter, which I had the pleasure of driving, we made slopes and hills, paddling pools, a running stream, and a 5-foot deep sand garden where children can dig down and build up high. Within a few months, it was working to capacity for 500 children a week. So the Handicapped Adventure Playground Association, which had been formed, set about finding other sites, and by 1974, 3 more were identified with almost all the funding found. This work is covered in great detail in a film made originally by the Central Office of Information as part of the Pacemaker series, It's now available in a slightly different form on BFI free service entitled Lady Allen. And again, I've included details at the end. It's proven impossible to identify with any certainty the number of gardens that Marjory Allen worked on or created, and finding visual evidence has been even more difficult. Apart from those mentioned already, you'll see on the slide a picture bottom left of a collaboration between Marjory and John Brooks of a garden featured in Town Gardens to Live In. The roof garden may have been in Lowndes Square in London, and the garden shown bottom right was for H.G. Wells when he moved to London after Marjory had created an extensive garden at his previous home. Marjory started writing about gardens in the mid-1920s for the Manchester Guardian, and in 1934 she took over as country diary correspondent. In her memoirs, she notes that she had the good fortune to renew her friendship with Susan Jellicoe, and they together conceived the idea of an illustrated book called The Things We See, published in 1953. This was followed by The New Small Garden in 1956. Marjory wrote a great deal about play and playgrounds, at least 7 books or pamphlets, including Design for Play, published by the Housing Centre Trust in 1961, and Planning for Play, Thames and Hudson, 1964. Her pamphlets on different aspects of play were particularly successful. She favoured this style, believing, as she says, quotes, "An expensive book is likely to lie on the town clerk's desk, unseen by the councillors and officers who most need it, or by the voluntary workers who couldn't afford to buy it. A low-priced illustrated pamphlet is within the reach of everyone." And so it proved. Her pamphlets on different aspects of play sold over 50,000 copies, but at 6p or a shilling, they probably didn't contribute greatly to her permanent state of penury. This blue plaque was erected by English Heritage at 22 Lawrence Street, Chelsea, in 2024. I imagine that history is littered with forgotten heroes and heroines, but surely few people could have done so much, yet received so little official recognition. Even in her obituary in the Times of the 13th of April 1976, it's noted that her recent autobiography was a book which achieved far too little attention. Just recently, I listened to a BBC programme about adventure playgrounds, and it took 18 minutes before Marjory Allen's name was even mentioned. And then the author of a recently published book on the subject claimed that the first 2 playgrounds in England were spearheaded by the MPFA. Well, sort of. For anyone who's interested in hearing children talking about being involved with an adventure playground, Josie Long has made an excellent programme called The Imperiled Adventures of an Adventure Playground for BBC Radio in 2021. She credits Marjory as the woman who did more than anyone else to establish adventure playgrounds in the UK, and so I've included a link at the end of this talk. It's clearly true that Marjory was a child welfare advocate, as the plaque says. But perhaps key to her life was that she actually achieved physical change as well as advocacy. It's impossible to summarise her life, but for me, 3 things shine a light on this remarkable woman. Happiness was her guiding motivation. She mentions it more than almost anything else. The imperative of freedom in its many forms and guises was key to her work. And the environment was everything, perhaps just not in the way one might expect. One lasting tribute is the existence of the Lady Allen of Hurtwood Memorial Trust, which offers 2 bursaries annually to play practitioners who wish to travel to expand their knowledge, raise awareness, and make new contacts. In this way, the abiding concerns of this remarkable woman are being kept alive. Sadly, the importance of play for children in our society remains largely misunderstood. A few true adventure playgrounds do still exist in the UK, but if you search that term, you will find places using the name that bear no resemblance to the OED definition, or indeed to Marjory Allen's endeavours. In the decades since her death, Safety First Childhood has triumphed, to the point, as widely recorded recently in the press, that almost a quarter of Gen Z people are too frightened of using a stepladder to change a light bulb. The imperative of risk and of learning to calculate it was the common thread in Marjory Allen's work for children. Recent statistics on the physical, mental, and emotional health of childhood present a terrifying picture, recorded widely by such as Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Anxious Generation. And it's hard to see where change will be achieved because the link between the lack of true play opportunity and people frightened to climb a stepladder is not being made. I believe Marjory understood the importance of risk and freedom and its relationship with well-being, with happiness, even mental health, from her earliest days because she lived it at home and at Bedales with its philosophy of outdoor work. These principles drove her life's work, from salesgirls needing fresh air, nursery children playing on a rooftop, the use of wasteland and materials to enhance the health of children in wartime, and then for all children to have opportunities to make their own places. That makes it sound simplistic, which of course it's not, but I suggest it's even more important and urgent that these things are understood today than it was during Marjory Allen's remarkable lifetime. As she said, better a broken bone than a broken spirit. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you so much. That was absolutely inspiring and frighteningly instructive to some of us at any rate. So I do thank you for that. She was obviously a very persuasive woman. Did she have much opposition to her ideas and schemes in her early days?
Oh, huge, Helen, huge. She was that report that ended up as the Children's Act 1948. She was absolutely vilified in the House of Commons, in Parliament. It's unbelievable the amount of resistance, and yet she carried on. It seems driven by some huge inner strength, which I can only admire. It must have been really, really difficult to do what she did. She often challenged the establishment in ways which, in the main, I think she handled very well. And she was, as you rightly observed, persuasive, but it wasn't at no cost. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, good for her. We seem to be getting quite a good debate going on in the questions. So I'll start on those if I may. Please keep them coming in. Don't stop typing in your queries. Sarah asks, where would you go to view the Landscape and Garden journals, and how easy is it to access the Bedales School archive? Annabelle, thank you for responding to that. Merle stands for the Museum of English Rural Life in Reading University, which has, I think it's the complete run, isn't it, of landscape and garden journals that when progressed to other landscape journals subsequently. Has anyone got an answer to the Bedales School archive? Is that accessible?
Bedales is very accessible, and got lots and lots said, trying quite hard, I think, to catch up with a backlog of paperwork, but there is a lot on there, and I had no problem with it at all. It was really easy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And who hasn't got a backlog of paperwork? I'm afraid I've got a bit chatty in this one. and there is one answer to my question already. I wondered who took responsibility for the engineering of those early roof gardens, because now there's a great deal of huffing and puffing about making sure they are suitably supported and the drainage works, etc., etc. And I'm sorry, is it Johanna or Johanna? Oh, Joanna says Selfridges had an earlier roof garden of 1910. Presumably that fact helped her with Gordon Selfridge's support, perhaps literally as well as metaphorically. Had this earlier garden completely disappeared by the time Marjory conceived her roof garden there? So you've got two questions in one there.
It seems it did. I mean, there are references and there are some images showing a rifle range with men in top hats and a whole range of other physical activity. There's not a lot of evidence of a garden as we would understand it, except a wonderful piece of artwork, a beautiful painting, which I desperately wanted to use, but it's out of time and out of kilter with the timescale that we're talking about. Annabelle and I talked about it quite a lot. And we don't believe it was actually an image of an earlier garden. It was probably a bit of a marketing ploy. There were certainly activities up there, but whether quite to what extent they constituted a garden as such, we're not sure. And it would appear from her comments when she first went up in the lift that there wasn't much to be seen at all.
But who would have done the engineering for the earlier garden, let alone the one that Marjory Allen worked on?
A very good question, because you heard me say, and I don't know where it came from. I picked it literally out of memoirs that she was only allowed 18 inches of topsoil.
Yeah.
So somebody somewhere had got hold of that issue, obviously, but who it was, I really don't know.
Do you think St Pancras had the same issues, or was that a good luck, or was she a secret engineer?
I think that was Ian Hamilton, because she was so involved at the conception stage.
Yeah,
she managed to get him to move his chimney stacks. I think it was known that they were actually going to put the nursery there from the very early stages. So I'm assuming that the necessary precautions were taken.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Oh dear, it's me again. Was there a gender bias in the use of the early adventure playgrounds? And I wondered if Marjory Allen would have perceived the need for the current Make Space for Girls initiative. Were they all in there together, messing around and having a fabulous time?
They were. Actually, they were. I think there were assumptions about the likelihood that, certainly I think with the older ones, I mean, I remember adventure playgrounds being used by 16 and 17-year-olds and even some 18-year-olds. And there's no doubt that was probably biased towards boys at that age. But we have to remember, again, sadly, I remember only too well, large families appearing in adventure playgrounds where the eldest girl, unfortunately, had to look after all the younger ones. And an awful lot of their time was taken up in childcare. But they were there, and they were there in the same numbers. And I can remember ghastly scenarios where I had to actually say to play leaders, if boys fight, by all means intervene. If girls fight, stay out of the way, because they are not to be. I don't think there was either a written or unwritten gender bias at all, really. No.
Interesting. Why do you think it's becoming more of an issue today?
Why? What's becoming more
that it's perceived that many open spaces are not attractive to girls and teenage girls. They feel excluded. They feel that they don't invite them in.
I think it's time for further research into this, really, because I do wonder the extent to which it's fear-driven. I wonder the extent to which it's about the lack of specificity of interests by women, if that's true. But I'm afraid I don't know whether it's true. I spend probably far too much of my time nowadays involved with school environments. And the general environments that do exist, and particularly those that are not staffed, probably do suffer from, and it's not just post-COVID. I think it's a general perception about the lack of safety in public spaces, which is a real worry.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Sarah, I don't know if you would like to ask your own question or whether you would like to stay anonymous, but it sounds like an interesting scheme that you were talking about in your comment about being a play worker in a playground in Queen's Road, Peckham. Shall I carry on, or do you want to unmask yourself? You say that it was founded by a man, taken forward by his daughters, and a marvellous female Dutch play worker, and that may speak volumes, I imagine. Hanneke, have I pronounced that right?
That was absolutely correct. Sorry, I was just working out how to get myself off mute.
Yes, I thought you might be, but I didn't want to embarrass you. No, please.
Oh no, it was just a wonderful place and very inspiring. Bit rough around the edges, and it was just amazing to see its history and how it evolved over the years. I was involved in the early 2000s, but I think it had been founded maybe in the 60s or 70s, and I think it was a guy whose name was Ray. His daughters Kim and Kim and Rachel took it on afterwards and were very much heavily involved. But it was really interesting that it was such a grassroots thing, and also interesting that it was something that kind of sprung up across London. And there's actually a really interesting book that an artist made about all of London's adventure playgrounds. If I can find a link, I'll pop it in the chat. But yeah, that's nothing much else to add.
Is it indicative that it was a Dutch play worker who stayed so long?
I think there's something in it, and I think from talking to her, because she was still there when I worked there, we overlapped. I think when she moved to London as an art student, she just felt an affinity with the place because of things that were happening in the Netherlands when she was growing up. So I think when she joined, I think it was Ray, the gentleman that started the playground, I think she felt just an affinity with it because of her Dutch background. And that was kind of what propelled her forward and made her so dedicated over the years. But I think it's really interesting how it's evolved as a place over the years, because there was a kind of, for a while, I think the real estate value for places in London that are still like that, kind of ramshackle grassroots charities, there are a few kind of attacks on the land. And she, at one point, there was, she found some plans for housing to be built on the site, but they managed to, I think there was also, when I was working there, the kind of the mobile hut that they operated the playground from had been subject to an arson attack. So they were going through a very lengthy process of trying to get a new building. But it's interesting how over time and in the early 2000s, it became kind of more institutionalized, with the council taking it on and taking it forward. But for me, it's lovely to know that those places still kind of, in the current way of operating, can keep their foothold in the city.
Sounds
brilliant. Wendy, what's your view?
Well, two things. I think one is that there was coverage just recently, last weekend, about an initiative. The Dutch government are looking at reintroducing wild spaces for children to light fires and do things. Soft spaces out, stick fighting in. Dutch call for the return of risky play. I mean, certainly it's absolutely right. The essence of adventure playgrounds as they were that they were community things. They were actually established and run by local communities. And it was very much in London, part of the whole, almost every other person you bumped into was a community worker once upon a time. And there were lots and lots and lots of really good initiatives with residents and tenants associations, housing associations, and there's, you know, very well made point. I mean, I ran the Westminster Play Association for 13 years, and we literally grabbed land that then was worth millions. And it was a terrific fight to hang on to them for any length of time. Once the whole thing became, as has been said, slightly more organised, local authority funding, etc., it lost often its local community grasp. And generally speaking, I think that's one of the reasons that there are few of them left, and that the ones that are left are struggling to survive because they're not getting funding. The local authorities seem to be putting very little, if any, money anymore into play, which at one stage, holiday play schemes particularly, were really very common in towns and cities as well as London. But that's dried up as well. And I think we're looking at difficult times, but maybe concern about the fact that children are miserable. Children are, they have none of the opportunities they once had to express themselves, to live in the environment that they were born in a way that we, my generation, took for granted. And it's leaving its mark on generations of children who are struggling.
Do you think local authorities are very nervous about encouraging community groups to develop their own programmes or take responsibility for existing playgrounds?
Oh, I'm sure everybody's terrified by the whole legislative drive. Was probably one of the reasons long before COVID that all of this started to disintegrate. Everybody is so frightened of being sued for something or another. And the local authorities are, probably in the vanguard of that, really. That's one of the reasons why when fixed equipment playgrounds, which are not ideal, start to deteriorate, the solution is just remove everything, flatten everything, clear everything, because A, it's cheaper, and B, it removes the potential for liability.
How depressing. Thank you very much. Annabelle asks, can you say something about Marjory Allen's work? Sorry, somebody else put a message and it's all zipped down the screen. Just a moment, Annabelle, sorry. It's vanished off my screen. Can you say something about Marjory Allen's work with Arthur Rank and films, please?
Yes, she actually was the first chair of what became the forerunning organisation for the Children's Film Foundation. And one of the reasons that double thread, the film I mentioned about nurseries, was, and it's amazing when you watch it because there's the man banging the gong at the beginning and it's all very like being in the cinema. And Rank paid for it. He was a great friend, a great supporter. And her influence brought Saturday morning cinemas and all that was part of childhood way back in the day through cinema and film was really much down to Marjory. It was another thread of hers, which sadly I lost in putting this together because there were quite a number of things that I didn't get to focus on, for which I apologise. But
that's the next talk then, isn't it? We'll come back to that one. We'll hold you to that one. But fascinating. I didn't realise her involvement with Rank and Saturday morning cinemas and things like that. So thank you for exposing us to that. And Annabelle also asks, what were you involved with when you first met Marjory?
Well, I was involved in adventure playgrounds in London and met her through the London Adventure Playground Association, and she provided, well, I say she provided, it provided, but I think it was at her instigation, funding for a couple of projects that I was involved with in the East End of London. And it was towards the end of her life, but she was an amazing character back then. And I think I think one of the reasons perhaps that she wasn't, it was a strange time really, because a lot of what was going on was alternative and a little bit hippie still and a little bit on the edge. And there was this woman who was of an age where you couldn't believe that A, she was interested, and B, she was so knowledgeable about children. I mean, it just, I don't know, it was a strange disjuncture really. And I heard an interview recently where somebody actually said, and was there a woman called Lady Marjory Allen of Hurtwood involved in Adventure Playground? You know, it was unfortunate really. But yeah, that's how I encountered her. And as I say, she's been a heroine of mine ever since.
Well, I think you've created a few more people who will be following you and her. Caroline Holmes says, thank you, Wendy, for a superb exploration of Marjory Allen's work, which I will be drawing on. That's good to hear. Sarah, thank you very much for your links that you've put on. So please read the chat to get this information, and we can make it available to you if needs be. And there's there's a number of references there. Sally Ingram says, lots of photographers took an interest in Adventure Playgrounds. I wonder if you ever met Don Buck. Have I pronounced that right? He took a brilliant collection of London playgrounds, and there's a great archive. Oh, thanks for that, Sally.
Yeah, Don was an amazing guy, and the archive is in the Museum of Childhood, as it used to be called, in the V&A. And she's quite right. Phenomenal photographer, artist, and he was a great play worker. Yeah, made a big contribution to children.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for mentioning that, Sally. Any more questions? Trish, thank you. Saying a wonderful talk. There's lots of lovely compliments on there. If not, then I will hand you back to Annabelle, please. Are you there, Annabelle?
Yep.
Sum up.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Helen. Wendy, that was extraordinary. I think we'll all have to watch it all again immediately to take it all in. There was so much fact and information that you packed in there and ideas. And I think it would certainly be interesting to have some follow-up talks and see how Marjory fitted in with other people who took on the role of producing play areas, you know, that maybe didn't, you know, that she wouldn't have approved of or would have, you know, questioned. I think there's something really interesting there. Anyway, sorry, that's next one. Thank you so much for all the effort you put into this talk. It's really brilliant, and I'm sorry that bits of it weren't easier. It wasn't easier to find examples of her work and things, but I think that the work that she did do, which wasn't drawn work, I think was much more valuable, really. I wonder if we should call her a landscape architect. Sorry, that's for another debate as well. So thank you very much. If everybody would like to unmute themselves and cheer, please. That would be wonderful.